Hi, everybody, and good morning and welcome. We are so glad to have you joining Empowering Seniors. I'm Neil Sperry. I hope you've heard me on the radio. I've been on the radio for a good while, and I've actually been at this event in a couple of different venues 2 other times. This is a really different venue, and it's going to be fun. I brought PowerPoint today, and I'm going to share some photographs and some discussion points with you. I'm going to have a lot of fun. I hope you'll have a lot of fun as well. And so we're going to turn fiction into facts for the next half hour or so. So get comfortable and get a soft drink or a cup of coffee, and let's talk gardening. This is going to be a beautiful weekend for gardening in North Central Texas, and it's the best time of the year. This is why we put up with all that mess in the summertime, so that we can garden in the fall. It's the best time for planting. Nurseries are stocked right now, and they're trying to clear out a lot of merchandise before Christmas. They have more time now than they do in the spring. It's cool. This is going to be a cool weekend. Beautiful weather. Oh my goodness gracious. Let's go shopping. Let's get out in the landscape and garden. So I think I'm ready to go, and we're going to give it a try. I haven't done a lot of talks this way. I've done a few. If I make a glitch or two here or there, we're friends, right? We're going to get along just fine. So I'm going to share my screen now with you, and then I will get my talk underway, and we'll see how it goes. Hit share right there, and we'll hit share right there, and we'll see if that's working. How's that look, team? Looking all right? There we go. I think we're good. So that's just it. That doesn't tell you anything. Those are crepe myrtles, for crying out loud. I like crepe myrtles. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but they perform kind of my background function there, and with a little bit of effects out of good old Photoshop, they become the background of my talk. So once again, I'll welcome myself into your home or wherever it is that you are. My name is Sperry. I've been doing garden broadcasting in North Central Texas since 1970. I was with the Extension Service for 7 years, and then commercial broadcasting since 1978. And for this time, I'm your gardening fact checker right here at your service. You know, we've heard that term fact checker a lot this week, and that's about as close to the politics of it all that I'm going to get. I don't want to go there. I just don't want to go there. But we are going to talk about facts of gardening and turn fiction into those facts. So I bring you greetings from my front yard. The virtual background I had was our backyard. We live out in the country in Collin County, and we're in a pecan forest. There's a lot of shade overhead in this particular part of our landscape. Doesn't look like it, but there's a lot of shade. And in our backyard, it's nothing but shade. And so I tell you, you have to learn to cope with shade, and that's true. From the Sperry Home Landscape to you, and with thanks to Tarrant County Commissioner Gary Fickus. I can't say his name often enough, because this is a huge event. If you've not been to a real live in-person event, oh my goodness gracious, it's an effort, and he does a wonderful job of putting this together. So I'm going to turn fiction into facts. I've said that enough times. Myths and mistakes into successes for you in gardening. Rules of green thumb, things you'll want to remember so that you'll be successful in gardening. That is an actual, true enough, fall color photo down the road from our house. We live, as I said, out in the country. And that year, this is about 5 or 6 years ago, we had Shumard red oaks and ash and other trees, a couple of American elms. That's across from some soccer fields. And oh my goodness, they were so pretty. I took a lot of photos. So it can happen, doesn't happen very often, but that's beautiful. 30 facts you can use. Number 1, good soil is the foundation. You know, when you build a house, you want a good foundation for that house. When you build a landscape, when you build a garden, you need a good soil. There's a fact that you can always remember, no matter where it is that you live. If you add organic matter to any soil in the world, you will improve that soil. Whether it's a heavy clay or a sandy soil, you will improve that soil. Organic matter includes things like peat moss, sphagnum peat moss. It includes compost, well-rotted manure. It also includes a shredded pine bark mulch. I put an inch or an inch and a half of each one of those into the top foot or so of soil. That's what's in that mix right there. And then 1 inch of expanded shale. That looks like ground up flower pots. And in a clay soil, I'll add 1 inch of that into the soil. And that gives you a mix that's almost like potting soil. Number 2 fact to use: good landscapes begin with good plans. Have you ever just found a beautiful plant? I think I'll buy that. I think I'll take that home. And then you say, where am I going to put that? I don't really have a place for that plant. I think we've all done that. And that's a great way to fail, because that's when you get this gigantic tree and you have no business planting that thing. What was I thinking? So instead of doing that, you need to have a plan, and you need to hold to that plan. If you're going to take a journey, let's just say you're in downtown Fort Worth and you decide that you want to go to downtown, pick a beautiful city, Tyler, and then you get the idea, I believe I'll go through Austin. That's pretty too. That kind of is out of the way a little bit, you know? You need to have a road map. You need to have a map for your journey. And that's what your landscape plan is. GPS kind of ruined that whole concept for me, but you need to have a map. You need to have something that is drawn to scale. This drawing that you're looking at is a to scale, kind of a schematic of our World Collection Park of crepe myrtles in the city of McKinney, out in Craig Ranch. You see a school bus over there on the right, and that gives you some scale of how big that park is. It's 7.5 acres. All of the known varieties of crepe myrtles. This was not the planting plan. This was just kind of a presentation plan done by my friend Roland Jackson, so we could show it to the city and say, this is what we have in mind. I just realized as I'm looking at that he has some blue trees in there. I'm wondering what he had in mind when he drew those in. Guess I'll worry about that another day. Simple landscape. Simple landscaping is always in style. You'll never have to apologize for something simple. Look at how tasteful that is. It's beautiful and it's natural looking, and yet it is simple. Keep it simple. That goes for interior decorating, and it certainly does go for exterior decorating as well. Your house is the picture. Remember that, and the focal point of that picture is the front door. So that's where you're trying to draw attention. You use the tall plants off to the sides to frame the house, and you keep it simple. You don't do things to block that view, and you don't repeat the straight lines of the house. You try to draw attention to it without just repeating all of those lines. Your landscape is the frame of the picture. If you think of a beautiful painting, you would not put a pink and purple polka dotted frame around most paintings. That's rarely done unless it's some very, very modern art of some sort. So remember, your house is the picture. You need a nice frame. Landscapes are never really completed. Now, I'm going to show you 3 photos of my landscape. I'm not showing you the really way back when before of our landscape, and I'm not going to show you the here is how it started out. I'm going to show you, oh, that didn't look good. And that's this photo. What happened to the grass? Well, the grass got trampled out because that was a walk area, and it got shaded out. Wasn't enough sunlight. I tried, I planted new sod. That was a mistake. You know, when I tell you that if you don't have 5 or 6 hours of direct sunlight, St. Augustine isn't going to grow, that's where I learned. Those are words of experience. All right, so that was what caused me to say, time to remodel. That was the remodel job. I put a walkway in so I wouldn't have the trampling. I got the beds ready like I described. I hadn't yet rototilled, but there is the bed prep underway, and then there was the finished product. And we just redid the bed on the left to put some more mondo grass in it, something a little bit more permanent that looked better in the wintertime. Good landscapes are works in progress. Number 5, very thirsty today. Like our plants, we need a little sip of water once in a while. Know your USDA plant hardiness zone map. That's a lengthy phrase, isn't it? That is a fabulous work of art. This was done first back, I think, in the 30s. And the United States Department of Agriculture started keeping records of the lowest temperature achieved every winter, and they averaged them. And that's county by county across the whole United States, even in the mountains. And so then you can look in, you can get a copy of that map. The thing is 5 or 6 feet across, and you can find your county, and you can find right where the dividing lines are in your county. And you can see that you may go to 15 degrees on your county, a little north of you, 10 degrees, whatever it is. That's the national USDA plant hardiness zone map. Now I'm going to show you a simplified version of it from my latest book, Lone Star Gardening. This is the 1990 map. About every 20 years, they redo that fancy map, the real map. This is Neil's map. You have a real map and a Neil map. This is the Neil map. And the 1990 map, I want you to look at that, and then I'm going to show you the 2012 map that was redone at that time. After, and I don't want to get into global warming. There it comes again. Whether you're an advocate or not, we did have a string of some fairly warm winters in the early aughts, between 2000 and 2012 or so. There were a lot of warm winters. And so the average lowest temperature in the winter kind of went up a little bit. And look what it did to the zones. Look where zone 8 went, the yellow zone. It moved up enough that it includes all of the Metroplex. Zone 7, almost all of the Panhandle. Oh, for crying out loud. Well, what that means is if you choose a plant that is marked as being hardy in Zone 8, you're going to do quite well with it in Dallas-Fort Worth. That would be oleanders and gardenias. And to that, I have a one-word comment. Yikes! That plant's likely to freeze on you. Be very, very careful. I think, and I say this, I'm not going to talk a lot about my book. You know, the authors who come in my book, I tell you, on page 3 or 4, I warn you that you need to stick to a zone warmer. That's going to be the bigger number, the lower number. I'm sorry, it'd be Zone 7. Stick with Zone 7 plants in the Metroplex, and you'll be much safer. You won't have the freeze loss that you will if you use a lot of Zone 8 plants. Just keep that in mind, and you'll be a lot safer. That's a significant change, and I'll bet this map will adjust back south again. All right. Oh, there it says, be very careful. Native is not always best. I get a lot of questions on my radio program and on my Facebook page. I have a really active Facebook page. It's just my name, Neil. I have to spell it right, Sperry. A lot of questions. Neil, I want to do my whole landscape in native plants. And to that I ask, well, where are you talking about? Native where? Well, I live in Bedford. I just want it native to Bedford. Well, that rules out a lot of plants that people are going to call native plants. That red yucca that you see there blooming on the right and the left and the far left, that's not native anywhere around Bedford or anywhere around North Texas. The Shumard red oaks, the good dark green oaks are. Pin oak is native to East Texas. That's the yellow tree. That's not water oak. That's a pin oak. That's a sorry dog tree. That was accidentally planted in Allen. That's where I took this photo. You need to choose plants that are adapted. This is what my dad did. He had a PhD in botany from the University of Nebraska, and then he ended up founding the Range and Forestry Department at College Station at A&M. Before that, he had founded the biology department at Sul Ross in Alpine. And he talked about adapted and native plants from the time I can remember learning how to hold a fork. He was telling me about this stuff. With trees, know before you grow. All credit given to Encore, the electric service providers. That's what they say. They say it because they don't want to have to trim these trees. Don't be planting big trees in tiny places. Remember, I talked about that when you go buy a tree. Know before you grow, do your homework. That way you can avoid problems like this. Know how tall and how wide each plant, each tree, each plant that you buy will grow before you take it home. You'll avoid a lot of mistakes. Neil, I'm getting older. I can ask this now because I'm getting older. Neil, I'm getting older. I don't have all the time in the world. I want a good, fast-growing shade tree. And I say, all right, first of all, those terms are self-excluding. Can't have both. I want you to do something for me. I want you to list the other things that are important in that shade tree. And so I'll ask them, do you care how it looks? Well, yeah, I care. I don't want some ugly tree in my yard. Okay, do you care if it lives more than 10 years? Yeah, I wouldn't want to plant a tree and then have it do what this Bradford pear did in 10 or 12 years. Okay, I'll write that down. So I have fast growth, good looks, live a long time. Those are important things to you. Do you care if it has insect and disease problems? Yeah, I don't have to spray it all the time. All right, so pest resistance is important to you. Fast growth, good looks, lives a long time, pest resistant. Do you care if it's adapted to our climate and our soils? In other words, not going to freeze here, not going to turn yellow like that pin oak did. Yeah, that matters. Okay, so it's adapted. So here are the 4, 5, 6 things that we've come up with. I want you now to go back into that list and rank them. You tell me which one moves the most. And they look at those. Which one are you willing to give up? And they think about those things. And they say, good gosh, the only one I'm willing to give up is the fast growth. I say, yeah, I thought that's where you would head. Those are the important things, those other things. Beauty, site adaptability, pest resistance, longevity. I'd be willing to wait an extra year or two if I could have all of those things. There's a fact you can really use. Buy a little larger tree. Maybe you don't go out to eat that one night. Maybe you invest that money. Anybody go out to eat now? Am I the only one? My wife's 75th birthday was Monday, and we ate on a parking lot with our kids 10 feet away from everybody. Had potbelly. That's a great, and she loved it. That was her first, her favorite pandemic dining out. We go there, we have a hamburger place we go, and she goes to KFC, and that's it, and it's all drive-through. So anyway, we eat out and think nothing of it. Spend a little bit more on that tree and get quality. The trees that are really good, like Shumard red oak, my favorite tree of all. I said when I was 20 years old, I would be honored to have a Shumard red oak planted at the head of my grave, and I'll still say it today. You can get one just as big in 20 years as a fast-growing tree in 15 years. I can wait that 5 years, especially if I'm there. 90% of any tree's roots are in the top foot of soil. I think this American elm kind of proves that. That was a seedling tree, probably a mistake, you think, in leaving it there. Good friend of mine owns that house, owns that tree, bought the house, bought the tree, and house is still there, tree's not there. Anyway, you always want to remember that tree roots at the surface are absolutely normal, and you need to account for that. You can't cut them off, not enough of them. You might be able to put a root barrier in to stop them from getting up into pavement, but you can't stop them when they're that close. You don't want to cover them up because they'll just grow through that too. Just remember that 90% of any tree's roots are in the top foot of soil. That's a fact that you need to stick in the back of your mind and just pull it out at a time when somebody's telling you something really boring. You pull that fact out and change the topic on them, and they'll really think you're smart. when you're buying trees, bigger is not always best. In other words, you don't have to go buy a great tall tree. You can buy a 6-foot tree and a lot of times get a 20-foot tree out of it faster than if you buy an 18-foot tall tree. You buy an 18-foot tall bald and burlap tree. See how much of the root system is lost when these are dug? Those are beautiful trees, and sometimes you need the look of a big tree, and so that's okay. But you don't get a big tree any faster going this way. So save your money, buy a smaller tree, take really good care of it. Plants and foundations can coexist. Just don't plant that American elm right up close to the house. These are small plants. They're going to get along just fine. Ground covers are not less work than lawns. Here's the way that comes to me on the radio or in my Q&A columns. I write for about 14 newspapers across the state. Neil, I am really tired of having to take care of my lawn. I want to do it the easy way. I'm just going to take the lawn out and I'll replace it with a ground cover. And here's the bad news of that. Ground covers are a lot more work than turf grass because you get to do everything by hand. You get to pull the weeds by hand. You get to do the trimming by hand. You can't take, in most cases, you can't take a lawnmower in to mow a ground cover. If you do, then you'll probably end up tearing up the ground cover. So ground covers are not less. You have to plant them by hand. I would not go into that deal thinking you're saving work. There are 3 times that ground covers are less work than lawns. Number one, you have a lot of shade, like that bed that turf grass that I showed you in my own lawn. Too much shade, can't grow grass. Then a ground cover is a good possibility, like this monkey grass on the upper level there. Number 2, if you have a really steep slope where you're going to roll down the hill, that's a good place for a ground cover, or where you'll have erosion. And number 3, if you have a long, skinny area where you just want something to give some greenery and you don't want to have to edge it and mow it and all that. But otherwise, stick with turf grass if you possibly can. You don't have to have a bed that is 50 feet long and 3 feet wide to have effective color. It doesn't have to be that big. This is my landscape. It's my peperomia. It's my desire to have color without having to plow up a big, long bed. I got lazy and it worked well. And that little peperomia plant went to the greenhouse in the winter and it came right back to its pedestal every summer for 5 or 6 years. And I started propagating it. Now I have a bunch of them. Any plant that you put on a pedestal is given hero status. And so you can use them for color programs like this and be very effective about it. Number 14, fact you can use, choose adapted annuals and plant them at the correct time. And so I'd ask of you, if we were looking nose to nose, eye to eye, what's the right time to plant marigolds? And most of you would wave your hands and say, I know, Neil, I know. And you'd tell me it would be April. April's a great time. Well, April's okay. And then in June, they all get spider mites and die. Yikes, not good. I'll tell you the best time is the middle of August. You don't get spider mites on the new transplants. You get little transplants that are just coming into bud. You don't get spider mites in the fall, and the colors are so rich, so intense. That same thing is true with zinnias. If you happen to have come here from the north, you look at zinnias and marigolds in the spring, you say, those are kind of insipid looking. Well, try them in the fall garden. They are glorious. Okay, here's another thing. Kind of goes with that turf grass thing. Neil, I'm tired of taking care of the lawn. I want an easier. Okay, Neil, I'm tired of having to replace my annual flowers twice a year. I just want to plant with perennials and I'll do it once and I'll never have to do anything again, or some variation of that. And that's hooey. That's just plain old-fashioned hooey. This is a plant called spiderwort, and it blooms 2 or 3 weeks in the spring and early summer, 2 or 3 weeks. And then you get to think of something else that will bloom the next 2 or 3 weeks and the next 2 or 3 weeks.
perennials don't bloom very long. And so it's up to you to schedule probably 20 different types of perennials for your garden so that you stagger them. You always have something coming along and blooming for you. If you don't have that, then your garden won't look very good. In fact, perennials are not very pretty when they're not blooming, and your garden may look weedy. It's a good idea to have some shrubs in a perennial garden and some annuals that do bloom for a long period of time. You have to do a lot of planning for a perennial garden. There is nothing more beautiful than a simple perennial garden that has been well designed and is maintained well. But remember, again, you have to do all that work by hand. You have to dig and divide them every 2 or 3 or 4 years, and you have to do it by hand because you can't get back in there with a rototiller to rework the soil. So perennials are not less work, they're more work, but the rewards are wonderful. Just know going in, I have some work ahead of me. This is our yard. That actually is where the fountain is. And so that's what evolves. Landscapes are works in progress. You get to a point where you have so much shade that even grass won't grow, and you can't correct for it with fertilizer. If you don't get enough sunshine, all the plant food in the world won't help. You don't get enough sunshine in your body, all the vitamins in the world aren't going to help. You need sunshine. All right, so I keep a record. This desk at which I'm sitting is where I broadcast. It's where I type my newspaper columns. I'm in this chair at this desk 7 days a week. And I keep a log of all of the questions that come into me. I've done that all of my career. I have notebooks. I'm not obsessive. I tell myself that every morning, every evening. 15,000 days I've told myself that. Not obsessive. And the most common question I am asked is some variation of, Neil, how can I get rid of this weed? And I have come to find many years ago that weeds are usually an indicator of some kind of a lawn problem. I forgot to water in the summer, the lawn grass died. I didn't fertilize properly, I mowed too high, I didn't get the grass planted right in the first place. Whatever it is, there's a failure in there somewhere, and the grass, the weed, whatever, was invited to come by. The best way to get rid of many weeds is simply to ramp up your lawn care. Take better care of the lawn, the weeds go away. I think they take pretty good care of their lawn. That Bermuda grass, that's in Richardson. Isn't that gorgeous? That's several years ago, but they don't look that good now. You want to use an all nitrogen fertilizer. Here are some critical tips that you can remember. Hope you're writing some of these things down. All nitrogen, that's the first number of the 3-number analysis. That's what Texas A&M research has shown. That's what in Ohio they recommend. In fact, they're not allowed to sell any fertilizer with phosphorus in it in the state of Ohio. All nitrogen. Up to half of that nitrogen should be in slow release form. You want to have timed release nitrogen for sustained feeding. I am not an advocate of weed and feed products. I have to sell my own ads on my radio program in my publications, and I will not accept ads. I've turned down contracts that have been proposed that were for weed and feed products. I don't think you need to do both things at the same time. As a young man, my son Brian had heard me say that so many times that he said, Dad, I've got it. I figured it out. He said, I like English peas and I like ice cream. I just don't feel compelled to eat them at the same time. I personally have no problem in using weed killers. That's what my dad did as a professional with A&M. And I certainly don't have any problem in recommending inorganic fertilizers. Plants do not discern whether a fertilizer comes out of a fertilizer plant or out of a cow. They go into the plants as elements dissolved in water. But I don't want to put out a weed killer over my entire lawn when it's not needed that way. So weed and feed products are over the top as far as I'm concerned. The same fertilizer, that all nitrogen fertilizer, here's a coincidence, can be used on almost all of the plants that you're trying to grow, whether it's tomato plants or shade trees or turf grass. You can use it on almost anything that you're trying to grow. Steps to weed control. Number one, proper feeding at the right times. Remember what I said? You have to take the best possible care of your lawn. Number two, proper irrigation. If your lawn is healthy and vigorous and growing actively, then it's going to resist the weeds. Water deeply. I'm about to water deeply. Big, thirsty drink. If I were turf grass, I would be saying, thank you for that nice drink. And water less often. The lawn won't get thirsty quite so quickly. If you water 20 minutes a day or just spritz the lawn, hold the hose and you spritz the lawn, what happens when you do that is the grass roots come up to the surface of the soil and they're just kind of yipping like chihuahuas for their little bit of water. And then when you forget to do it, they die right away because they're all of a sudden not getting their water. Regular mowing at the recommended height to keep the grass low and dense. Think about how great Bermuda grass, for example, looks when it's in a crack in the pavement and you drive across it a bunch. You keep it low and dense and it's thick, it crowds out the weeds, and it just looks great. If you let it get too tall, it gets leggy, weeds will invade, it gets very stretched and weak. And then after you've tried all the other things, use the appropriate weed killer as needed. Read and follow those labeled directions. To pick the best weed killer, it's not a big deal. People on my Facebook page will post a question. It's kind of interesting. I'll show it to my wife. Say, they don't care what that weed is. They'll post, like the thing in the lower left. Neil, what is that weed? All those seeds. If I tell them, I can guarantee you that I can eliminate that weed in your lawn, that's great, that's perfect. Or if I tell them that's annual bluegrass, oh, well, that's nice. How can I get rid of it? That's what they really wanted, but they don't ask the whole question. They just ask, what is this? And so to cut to the chase, you don't have to know what the weed is to be able to control it, because odds are it's not going to be on the label of the product. There are too many weeds. Let me tell you how to find the right weed killer. You have to be able to answer 3 pairs of questions. That's all you have to do. Here are the 3 pairs of questions. Is it annual or perennial? Annual meaning, does it come up in the spring, grow, or at some time during the year? Does it germinate, grow, and then produce seeds and die, like grass burrs do? That's an annual weed. It sprouts in the spring, grows in the summer, makes its seeds right now, and it's gone. The flower, the really pretty flower there, is henbit. Henbit is germinating right now, and it will bloom its head off for about a week and a half in March. And I'll tell people how to kill it in March, and they will say, it's beautiful, Neil, you are anti-American. You're killing wildflowers. And 1 week later, it's just ugly as all get out. So an annual bluegrass doesn't look like anything right now. You can hardly see it out in lawns. It's just germinated. But by March, it's awful. And so if it's annual, you can use a pre-emergent weed killer. Those 3 are annuals. That's Dallas grass on the right, D-A-L-L-I-S grass on the right, lower right. And that is perennial, so you have to deal with it totally differently. Is it cool season or warm season? If you're dealing with an annual weed where you're going to have to use a pre-emergent, you have to know whether it's growing in the winter or in the summer, and time your pre-emergent weed killer back accordingly. And third, is it a grass or not a grass? The not grass means it's a broadleafed plant. You have one broadleaf plant in these pictures, and that's the henbit with the purple flowers. Grasses have parallel veins, and their flowers are not showy. Okay. No offense meant for Heinz vinegar. This is my wife's favorite vinegar. That's where I found this bottle and took this photo, right in the pantry, 10 steps from where I'm sitting. Stick with legally labeled products. I decided I wanted to just photograph a product you would recognize instead of one that I would find in a garden department of a place that sells things that I won't even touch. I don't want to endorse them. I won't take them as advertising products. There was a long time that you could buy vinegar for killing weeds, and it did not have any kind of label telling you how to use it, how to protect yourself, what to do if you spilled it on your hands and your eyes. Didn't have any of that. Oh, it had a label. It said, this is vinegar. Don't cook with it. Don't drink it. Don't do anything with it. This is vinegar. Over here on the sheet of paper, which is not the legal label, it said, oh, this is going to kill weeds. You can do this, you can do that. But that's not the legal label. If you got hurt using that product, you couldn't sue the company from that piece of paper because on the legal label, it says, don't do any of these things. I don't want that on my conscience. I stick with legally labeled products. Perhaps it's the experience of growing up with a dad who was a professor at Texas A&M and watching him spend 25 years of his career doing the testing for various companies to prove what they were trying to claim. Beware of home remedies. You'll never hear me allow somebody to give a home remedy in my program, and you'll never hear me give a home remedy of how to get rid of weeds. Organic is not always safer. I'm all for organic gardening where it is safer or where it is at least equally safe, where it makes sense, but don't think that organic is better because it isn't always better. Organic produce doesn't taste any better. The plant does not discern whether it's taking in elements out of a, as I said, out of a fertilizer plant or out of cow. Organic gardeners are more careful gardeners, and that's often why their produce is so much better. But it's not because they were grown organically with organic fertilizers. And organic things are not always safer. I care and I worry and I pay attention because I have a grandson, Joseph, who is now 11. Been a few years that have passed since that photo was taken. I have a great granddaughter, Jackie. This photo was taken 3 weeks ago. I care about our environment and I pay attention. We have 6 other grandchildren and no other great-grandchildren. We're not that old. Look for valid land-grant university reports. A land-grant university is an ag college. That's Texas A&M, LSU, Oklahoma State, Clemson. Rutgers is a land-grant university for New Jersey. University of Arkansas. Usually it will be the A&M or the state university in like Ohio State, where I got my 2 degrees. I grew up in College Station, but transferred up there. That's how you'll tell the land-grant school. But in some states, there isn't, until Texas State took that name, we didn't have a Texas State University doing this. So it was Texas A&M. But anyway, you need to find the land-grant school, and that research is what you can trust. Don't trust research that has been done by Jack's Laboratory, and then you find out later that the company making that mosquito trap is owned by Jack somebody or whatever. That's where you'll run aground when you find that you've been deceived, that a lab is not really an independent lab. It's owned by the company that's making the product. All right. Practice good irrigation. You never know, even in the middle of a flooding rainstorm, when the next drought will hit Texas. And so you always want to practice good irrigation practices. Quality equipment in good repair. Have somebody come out and run an irrigation audit on your sprinkler system if you have one. I don't have photos in here of a water bubbler or a water breaker. I should have had those in, and I'll have them in the next time you invite me to speak. But those are 2 wonderfully useful tools. A water breaker, that's the thing you see often in garden centers that looks like a shower head. A water bubbler it's about the size of your fist, and it lets you turn the water at full volume and you won't wash the soil out of a pot. It's great. So I recommend those highly. Have a smart controller. If you have a sprinkler system, a smart controller will predict what the rainfall has been, what it will be, what the wind is. It will monitor the wind. It knows what your soil is. It knows what your slope is. It knows what plants you're trying to grow. And they're really cool in that if you're on a slope with a clay soil and you're growing a plant that's going to need a good bit of water, it may tell that sprinkler. So this was happening last night when my wife and I drove in our driveway. It was watering one station near our front door. For the fourth or fifth time, it had gone through the entire cycle and had come back to station 2 and watered it several times because there's enough of a slope that it would have run off otherwise. So you need to have a smart controller that will do that for you. They pay for themselves. Learn to recognize dry plants. Don't ever water a plant that's already wet, but learn to recognize when a plant is beginning to get dry and then water it pretty quickly at that point. Water deeply and water less often. I just took a little bitty sip. I should have taken a big drink. I will in a minute. Buy quality tools. This is Flexogen hose. I have never gotten a dime from Flexogen hose. I'm not on their payroll. This is not an endorsement. It's just true belief in a product. Since I was in college, it's the only hose I've ever used, ever bought. Won't buy another brand because, well, it's now been bought by somebody. It has a slightly different name, but oh my goodness gracious, these hoses last. And you get a hose like that, you're going to save money in the long run. The same is true for other gardening tools. Buy reinforced shovels. They won't break in this heavy clay soil. All the way through, buy for quality. Prune with a purpose. What on earth were they thinking? Is there no imagination left in maintenance crews? Oh my goodness gracious. That's Texas sage. It's a beautiful rounded shrub. This is in Allen, Texas. And if I ever want to learn how to prune shrubs, that's the last place I'll go. Everything there is just square as a box. Why didn't they just go to a lumber yard and buy some plywood and green paint and gray paint and build some boxes and set them out? It'd be so much easier. Wouldn't ever have to water them. Have the same look. Nobody'd know. Oh my goodness. Let a plant grow naturally. Buy a plant that fits the space that you have and then let it grow. Poor things. Choose plants whose sizes fit the spaces available. If I were to look up from my iMac right now and look out the windows of my office, I would see the old flower heads on those oak leaf hydrangeas. That's the outside of my office looking in, and I sit in the inside looking out, and I can see them right now. I'm looking right there, and there they are. I love that plant, and that's my vista. Once they're through blooming, I trim them back enough that I can see farther out into the woods in that backyard setting that I have. Choose plants whose sizes fit spaces you have and prune them naturally. Don't prune them square. My goal, I forgot to warn you of this, my goal when I begin one of my talks is to offend everybody in the room. And probably I offended most of you with that one. To repeat, prune with a purpose. That is not a purpose. It's kind of cute, but it's not a purpose. I have found in all those years of broadcasting and photographing and talking to people that probably 90% of the pruning that I see done is either done wrong, it's done at the wrong time, or it didn't need to be done in the first place. What are you doing? Go watch a ball game. Go vote. Go do something. Choose the best. By the way, you're about to see 2 number 29s. I promised you 30, and I have 2 number 29s. I messed up. I saw that I messed up. I had time to change it. I didn't see anything I wanted to take out. It's like those, which of these assets are you going to take out to leave room for a fast growing shade tree? I don't want to take any of them out. Okay, so we have choose the best fruit varieties for your area. Our area gets 750 chilling hours. That's the number of hours between 32 and 45 degrees. And that is very important for peaches and plums and some of the other fruit crops, especially peaches. If you buy a peach variety that has a chilling requirement of 300 hours, it's going to bloom early in the winter. We will have had that many hours early in the winter, and then it'll get frozen. That's what happens to apricots, why they're not adapted in our area. If you choose a peach variety that has 1,000-hour chilling requirement, it will probably never bloom, and it will probably never leaf out. That's why chilling hours on these fruit crops is so critical. Do your homework ahead of time. Texas A&M has some wonderful fact sheets, and they have one master fact sheet that lists all of them, and it is active hot links that will take you to each one of them. You think I have that on my iMac right up at the top of my screen while I'm broadcasting? If I need to learn something about papayas, hey, click right there, and I've got a sheet. I rarely do that. I try to wing it without a lot of reading, because you can hear me if I'm reading something. You can say, I don't think Neil has a clue what he's talking about. And I'll usually say that. But that fact sheet is really helpful. It's if you look up Aggie Horticulture, fruit, and I think it's either fruit and pecan or fruit and nut fact sheets, it'll take you right to it. All right, there's the chilling hours and the best suited types. And here's the other number 29. I realized I needed to talk about vegetables also. So you also need to have the best vegetable varieties for this area. And you know, both of these need to be tempered by what your family likes. No point in growing rutabagas if nobody's going to eat them. I know that those radishes are beautiful. Nobody likes radishes? Oh, well, don't grow them. And one other warning I'm going to give you. These must be planted at the correct times. 2015 was that year when we got 70 inches of rain in north central Texas. And there were a lot of vegetable crops that were not planted at the right time, and they never made a crop. Tomatoes went in a month late. You can't do that. You get into the summertime. Beans went in 3 or 4 weeks late, and they never made a crop because it got too hot too fast. You need to hit that window. I'm about to show you my book, and my book has the planting dates for each part of Texas. And you need some kind of a chart like that. The A&M vegetable sheets also has a planting chart that will help you. Somewhere you need to have that information, because you have a 2 or 3 week window on planting, for example, Irish potatoes, the middle of February, and onions the last week of January, and squash the first 2 weeks of April, and tomatoes the first 2 weeks of April, and okra the middle of April to the 1st of May, and so forth all the way through. You need to honor that. Look for professional help, somebody you can trust. This is Steve Hauser, my buddy, who is the owner of Arborilogical Services. Now, I always sound like I'm mumbling when I give that name. Arborilogical Services, great company, an even greater man. He is an arborist of the year for the state of Texas. That's working in our pecans here at our house. You need to find people who are the best in the business. Look for certified arborists. Look for Texas certified nursery professionals, licensed turf irrigators, and pest control agents as well. They're all there. Each segment of the horticulture industry has certified professionals in it. That's what you want to look for. That's not a certified professional. I would be happy to help you. I'll tell you a few places where I work. I work, as I mentioned, Sunday mornings on WBAP from 8 to 10. And that is the phone number where you can reach me on Sunday mornings. I also am on KLIF, and I just didn't put it in here. It would have meant shrinking the photo. I did this slide a week ago. I've been doing that program for 2 years, so it would have been easy enough to put it in there. That's Saturday afternoons, and that's 570 on the radio dial, and that one is from 1 to 3 in the afternoons. There's my newsletter, eGardens. Sign up for it. It's free. You go to neilsperry.com, and there will be one coming out tonight. I've been working on it all day today, and I will be proofreading it. I beg your pardon. That was yesterday. I was working on it, getting it ready, and it was just as I got this ready. And it is a labor of love. I spend about a day to a day and a half each week on eGardens. Sign up at neilsperry.com. You can see what it looks like. We leave the latest one archived on my website always. I hope you'll sign up for it. And then join me on Facebook. Just spell my name right and you'll get to my page. There are a lot of pages there. And one of my competitors for a while had bought up the rights to, instead of neilsperry.com, he had neilsperry. I think, I don't know, org or something. And so, but neilsperry.com will get you there. And here is a special I have just for you, just for this event today. This is my latest book, Neil Sperry's Lone Star Gardening. I self-published this book because I didn't want to meet with committees. I wanted to be able to do it my way. And I also wanted to be able to hire Carolyn Skye, who had been an editor for me for many years on my magazine and other things. And I knew she was just fabulous. She is unbelievably fabulous. And I knew Cindy Smith, the graphic designer who had done my calendars for 10 years, was the very same way. The three of us did this book. It was printed in San Antonio by Clear Visions. I didn't want it to be printed in China. Most of the publishing houses now go to China with their books. I was at the press runs, all 43 press runs, to make sure it was done right. And there is an example of one of 25 multi-page charts that are in the book. 840 of my photographs. That's a photograph of our yard on the cover. What more can I tell you? I sign every book as it sells. And here is a little more information on it. Neil Sperry's Lone Star Gardening. It's not in stores and it's not on Amazon. You can only get it from my website or by calling my office. Look, if it were in stores, it would probably be $55 or $60 because of all the ink, the hardback, everything else. That's what I brought to you. I'll leave that up for just a moment. I have several questions that were asked, and then we'll shut it down. Number one, had a question that was sent fairly late in the game. Texas Star Hibiscus, care for the wintertime. When I grow that plant, and I love that plant, it's a hardy hibiscus. It's a mallow. I let them freeze with the first killing frost, and then I cut them off at the ground. And I'll put some tree leaves over the top. It's hardy clear to Lake Erie, so you don't have to worry about it freezing. And it'll be one of the later plants to come back in the spring, in April. And at that point, you just step out of the way and you're all set. So it's Texas Star Hibiscus. It looks very different from the other hardy hibiscus varieties. I have a question from Barbara in Arlington asking about pine trees in my yard. They cover over, they're over 50 feet tall. Is it good or bad for my yard to leave a lot of the needles and cones in the yard, or should I mulch over them? I would rake up the cones. You don't want to run those through your lawnmower. And I'd rake up the majority of the needles. I'd use them somewhere. They certainly should not be discarded. I don't think you want to try to run all of that through your mower. That's a lot of fiber to put through the mower. There are a lot of people who would love to have those to use as a mulch on the slope. They're very effective that way. I normally don't leave a lot of leaves on my lawn. That's too much organic matter. So that's number two. Number three, Howard in Hurst. What kind of fertilizer do I need to apply to my St. Augustine now that fall is here? What else should I be doing before cold weather hits? St. Augustine, well, we kind of covered it. All of the plants that you're growing need to have almost an all nitrogen fertilizer unless the soil test shows otherwise. So the first number should be the highest and probably the only nutrient that you add. And you need to have upwards of half of that nitrogen in slow release form, encapsulated. You do not want ammonium sulfate, for example, 2100, where it's all fast release. That would be very detrimental. Let your nurseryman or a really good hardware store employee who knows fertilizers, let them explain that to you and show you how to tell. Number four, D in grapevine. What are the, back to the St. Augustine in the fall, watch out for brown patch. It's showing up now. You pull on the blades in a browning area, they come loose easily. that's an indication of brown patch, and there are fungicides that will stop it. It will turn an area brown very quickly in 2 or 3 days. D in Grapevine asks, what are the biggest mistakes that homeowners make in maintenance-wise with our yards and trees this time of year? I think we quit mowing. We don't pick up the tree leaves. That's a good way to trap moisture beneath the leaves, and that will lead to diseases. We kind of forget about things because we think, well, we're going into the winter, it doesn't matter as much. That's probably the main thing. Richard from South Lakes had some tree limbs and little branches fall and wonders how he can determine the vigor of his trees, the health and vigor. Small branches, that happens. You have twig girdlers, the insect. You have a lot of things that will happen. I'd have to see that one. Katie in Richardson, the recent rains have brought fire ants. How can we peacefully coexist with fire ants? That is a phrase that I cherish. I don't think you peacefully coexist with fire ants. What you do is you get one of the area-wide baits that contain fipronil. I'll try. Fipronil. There's a U in there somewhere. I did not spell that completely correctly, but you get the message. Fipronil area-wide bait will attract them, and they'll take it back to the mound. The mound will die. The queen will die. And then finally, Linda in Fort Worth says, I have 3x3 or 4x4 square, space. She wants 1 or 2 flowers and vegetables in a 3x3 or 4x4 space. Wants to have light, temperature, and water requirement suggestions. Oh, golly, that is a complicated question to answer. That's not much room. You're going to have to, that would be room for 1 tomato plant, for example, a 3x3 foot space. You could put lettuce beneath it. You could put some trailing annuals like pansies. Of course, pansies are in the winter. The tomato would be summer or late spring. That one you're going to have to just play around with a little bit and see what you like best and see what other people have done. There are plenty of things that can grow in that. You could have herbs in front of the tomatoes, basil, other things that don't get too tall. But that one's kind of a matter of personal taste. Folks, that is what I have for you. I've left up on the screen my contact information, neilsperry.com, and I'm on Facebook with my name. You can get me there, and certainly on WBAP Sunday morning and KLIF on Saturday afternoon. I have loved being with you today. To the sponsors of this event, thank you, and to County Commissioner Gary Fickus. As you know Gary, or as you see Gary, or if you have a chance to write to him, tell him and his staff, well done, very well done. Thank you for watching. Happy gardening.